Hello and welcome to Money Culture. This is Ian Lohr. Today we will be speaking about modern economics, starting with a history of economic systems. When considering securities markets, it is helpful to define and explore financial markets along with a short examination of where the modern economy has come from. Economics can be characterized as the science of scarcity. In the simplest possible terms, there are not enough goods and services for everyone to have as much as they want. Varying social systems have been established throughout human history to distribute these scarce resources. These systems have included feudalism, collectivism, and capitalism. In our century, most nations follow a mixed market approach, a capitalist economy with limited and strictly defined areas of government control and regulation. In ancient times, the economic affairs of nations were operating under the direct control of the government. In the earliest despotisms, all decisions were made by a single hereditary ruler, a king or emperor or the equivalent. In more advanced systems, known as feudalism, some of these decisions were delegated to a hereditary military elite known as knights or lords. A little more than 300 years ago, the same type of European liberal intellectual who developed modern representative democracy advanced the idea that economies could operate more smoothly without external controls or excessive regulation. This would result in a relatively steady and predictable rate of growth, ultimately providing greater wealth for all. This economic system is known as capitalism and represented a radical departure from the ways of the past. Collectivist systems were also developed around this time, which have included socialism and communism. The earliest economies functioned entirely on a barter system. Goods and services were exchanged in return for other goods and services of equivalent value. After the development of coinage, around 3,000 years ago, the barter system was gradually replaced with a medium of exchange that carried a standard value, what we call money. While money was once minted in precious metals, modern money has no intrinsic value, and the value of modern money depends on the amount of goods and services which can be obtained in exchange for it. While money has existed since antiquity, among most people for the bulk of human civilization, barter persisted. Often, in many societies, the lending of money was prohibited. Essential economic decisions in a primitive society were made by a hereditary ruler, and his policies were carried out by a hereditary elite. This form of government, by the way, is known as oligarchy, or rule by a select few. Most people were not in this noble class, and their activities were limited to farming and religious observances, engaging in essentially constant work with virtually no compensation. Often these were known as peasants or serfs, but slavery was also a nearly universal institution at this time. An ordinary person would work a small farm with almost no specialization of labor. These peasants would then give the local lord or king most of what they grew. In return, the lord or king would protect them from hostile tribes, nations, or people. This amounts to an institutionalized protection racket. Peasants were often forbidden to move off of their land. Wealth was also plundered from conquered foreign nations and colonies. These types of primitive economy are also characterized by the aggressive exploitation of resources, including human life and labor. Development and innovation were stifled, and the institution of slavery was almost universal. Some kings encouraged conflict among their lesser nobility in order to keep them in line. Others warred continuously upon your neighbors. This system is called feudalism, as all nations were feuding with all other nations, and all types of authority within nations were feuding with each other. Life under the feudal system is often described as being nasty, brutish, and short. In response to the abuses of the feudal system, starting in the 18th century, philosophers and economic theorists developed the idea of forming collectives to make economic decisions. Since this was frowned upon by the hereditary nobility, the establishment of collectivism would necessitate overturning the old order and creating a new one. The least extreme version of collectivism is socialism. Here, most of the market behaves as a free market, just as with capitalism, which will be discussed later, except that certain goods and services related to people's basic physical needs, such as food and medicine, are provided to all citizens by the government. The government pays for these goods and services through high tax rates. Socialist countries in our century include Sweden and Norway. A more radical variation of socialism, first developed by Marx and Engels in the middle of the 19th century, is known as communism. Intended to address the top-weighted nature of the emerging industrial capitalism, which we will be discussing in future sessions, communism takes a massive leap away from free markets and towards more government control. Only in a communist economy, as contrasted with a highly controlled feudal economy, the centralized authority responsible for making these decisions is not a hereditary oligarchy, but an elected council of ordinary citizens. Communism is often characterized as a system which takes from each according to their means and gives to all according to their needs. Economic decisions are made through centralized economic planning. There is no private ownership of property, and the state is the only employer. Economic stability and growth depends on making good decisions among a committee of dozens, hundreds, or perhaps even thousands of people. While ideally promoting economic equality and democracy in the purest sense, communism in practice has proved to encourage the opposite, and communist states often lean towards totalitarianism. The usual example from the recent past is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. A Soviet is a council of labor unions. In our century, the only remaining communist nations are the People's Republics of China, North Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba. In all of these nations, communism has served to restrict growth, stifle initiative, deny creativity, destroy innovation, and prevent individualism. In the next session, we'll be speaking about the common modern alternative to these systems, capitalism.